My mother-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "You're lucky we even let you use our kitchen." Then she took my recipes, registered my business name, and opened a bakery with my husband's blessing. 3 weeks later, I walked through the front door of their grand opening with a lawyer, a cease and desist letter, and every document she forgot I had kept. But let me tell you how we got there. I met my husband at 23. I was finishing culinary school, working double shifts at a diner, saving every dollar I could in a jar I kept under the bathroom sink because I didn't fully trust banks yet. He was charming and funny and told me I was the most driven person he had ever met. I believed him. I believed all of it. His family was loud and warm and immediately pulled me in like I had always been there. His mother hugged me at the door the first time I visited. His father shook my hand and said, "She's a keeper." His younger sister braided my hair in the kitchen while his mother cooked. I thought, this is what family feels like. I had grown up with just my grandmother, quiet holidays, an empty chair at every table, so I leaned in hard. We got married when I was 26. Small ceremony, backyard. I made the cake myself, 3 tiers. Lemon lavender, the kind of thing I had been perfecting for 4 years. People cried when they tasted it. His mother pulled me aside and said, "You have a real gift." She squeezed both my hands. I thought she meant it. I was the one working. My husband had been between jobs since before we got married. He had ideas, always ideas, but nothing ever landed. A fitness app, a podcast, a drop-shipping business that lasted 11 days. I paid our rent. I paid our car insurance. I paid his mother's electric bill twice when she called and said she was short. I didn't complain. That's what you do for family. You show up. The bakery idea had been mine for 6 years before I ever said it out loud to anyone. I had notebooks, 3 of them, spiral-bound, full of recipes, flavor combinations, margin calculations, supplier contacts, a logo I had sketched myself. I had been researching commercial kitchen rental spaces in our city. I had a name picked out. Honeycrust. I loved that name. I had written it in the top right corner of every notebook page, like a signature. I made the mistake of sharing it over dinner. It was a Sunday. His mother had come over, and I had made butterscotch tarts and a rosemary shortbread that she ate 4 of while I talked. I laid out the whole plan. The startup costs around $8,400 for the first 3 months, which I had already saved most of. The target market, the farmer's market booth I wanted to start with before moving to a brick and mortar. The name. The logo. I even pulled out the notebook and showed her the flavor development pages. She said, "This is brilliant." My husband said, "I could run the business side. You handle the baking, I handle everything else." I thought that sounded like a partnership. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, my husband told me his mother wanted to be involved. "She has connections," he said. "She knows a guy who can get us commercial space at a discount. This is a good thing." I said I wanted to keep the original plan small, farmer's market first, scale slowly. He said I was being stubborn. He said his mother was trying to help. She started coming to our apartment to review the concept. She asked to photograph the notebooks. I said I'd rather make copies. She said, "I'm not going to steal your recipes, sweetheart." She laughed. I made the copies anyway, but I also let her look at the originals. That was September. In October, my husband stopped bringing up the bakery idea. When I asked, he said things were still in motion. In November, he asked me to transfer $6,000 into a joint account he had opened the startup fund, he said, to hold the money in one place so it was easier to manage. I hesitated. He said, "Do you trust me or not?" I transferred it. The week before Thanksgiving, I was driving home from my shift at the catering company where I worked, and I passed a storefront on Clement Street that had a new sign in the window. A logo. A name. Honeycroft. Not Honeycrust. Honeycroft. Close enough that my stomach dropped immediately. I pulled over. I sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then I got out and pressed my face to the glass. Inside, there were bakery cases. A counter. Paint the exact shade of warm cream I had described from my notebook, not a standard color, a specific one I had looked up. Sherwin-Williams Antique White, 9108. Chalkboard menus on the wall. I could see shortbread on the display card. I called my husband. He didn't answer. I called 3 more times. On the 4th call, he picked up and said, "Hey, I was going to talk to you about this. I said, talk to me about what? He said his mother had found a space and it made sense to move fast. He said they had used my framework but adapted it. He said my name wasn't on anything because I was still employed elsewhere and it would complicate the finances. He said I would still be involved, I could bake on weekends, help with the menu. I said, where is my $6,000? He said it had gone into the build-out. I sat in our car on Clement Street for another 22 minutes after I hung up. I didn't cry. I just sat very still and thought about every Sunday dinner, every electric bill, every birthday cake I had baked for his family for free, every hour I had spent in a diner and a catering kitchen saving that money dollar by dollar. I thought about my grandmother, who had told me once, people will take everything you give them and then tell you that you gave it freely. I had one friend I called. Her name was Dara. We had been in culinary school together, graduated the same year. She had recently been laid off from a restaurant group that had done a mass cut 43 people let go in one afternoon. She was doing odd catering jobs, barely covering rent. When I told her what happened, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, okay, I need you to listen to me and not argue. I said, okay. She said, do you still have the notebooks? I did. All 3. She said, do you have the original digital files? Anything date-stamped? Emails? Photos? Anything? I went through my phone that night. I had sent myself an email in March of the previous year with the subject line, Honey Crust Concept Draft, and attached a full document. I had photos time-stamped over 2 years back of recipe tests. I had a text thread with my husband from 8 months ago where I had described the business model and he had replied with 3 fire emojis. I had a voicemail from his mother from 6 weeks prior saying, and I am quoting her exactly, the rosemary shortbread is going on the menu first. That's final. It's genius. Dara said, forward me everything. Then she said something that confused me at the time. She said, I have about $400 left in my account, but I know someone. I said, Dara, I'm not asking you for money. She said, I know you're not. Stop talking. The next 3 weeks were the hardest I had experienced in recent memory. I was still going to work every day. I was still coming home to an apartment I shared with my husband, who acted as though nothing had happened, who told me I was overreacting and that I would see the vision once it opened. His mother called once to say that the Honeycroft opening was going to be wonderful and that there was a part-time position in the kitchen if I wanted it. A part-time position. In my own concept. In a kitchen that had been funded partly by my savings. I said, I'll think about it. I did not think about it. Meanwhile, Dara had been busy. The person she knew was a woman named Priscilla, a retired IP attorney who had gone to church with Dara's mother for 30 years. Priscilla was 71, sharp, and furious on my behalf within about 8 minutes of hearing the situation. She looked at everything I had sent, the dated emails, the photos, the texts, the notebooks I photographed page by page, and she said, this is a strong case for intellectual property misappropriation. I'm not charging you until we recover something. I asked Dara later how she had convinced Priscilla to take my case. Dara said, I went over there and brought her the rosemary shortbread recipe so she could bake it herself. She called me the next morning and said nobody had ever done anything that nice for her in 40 years of practicing law. That was Dara. That was exactly Dara. Priscilla sent a letter to my mother-in-law and my husband. Formal, precise, citing the dated materials and requesting an immediate accounting of all funds, a halt to commercial use of any recipes or branding elements derived from documented work created before the business formation, and a meeting to discuss resolution. My mother-in-law called my husband screaming. My husband called me and said I was destroying the family. I said, I want my $6,000 back, and I want my name removed from anything I didn't agree to, and credit given for the intellectual property or appropriate compensation. That's all. He said, you're being vindictive. I said, I'm being precise. There were 2 weeks of back and forth. Their attorney, a friend of the family, not a specialist, sent a letter arguing the concept had been materially transformed and that my contributions were informal and unverifiable. Priscilla sent back a response that I did not fully understand, but that made their attorney go quiet for 4 days. What happened next I want to describe carefully because people always want to know the details and I want to get them right. The Honeycroft grand opening was on a Saturday. They had done local press, a small feature in a neighborhood food blog, some Instagram posts. A few hundred people expected. My mother-in-law had rented a flower wall. There was a ribbon. My sister-in-law had made a slideshow. I arrived at 10:15 with Priscilla and a man named Todd who worked in her former firm and had agreed to assist. I was wearing the same cream blazer I had worn to my culinary school graduation. I had the notebooks in a bag. I had a printed copy of every piece of documentation. My mother-in-law saw me from across the room and her face did something complicated. My husband was next to her. He took a half step forward and then stopped. Priscilla handed their attorney, who was present. Apparently they had expected something, a formal cease and desist and a demand letter. The letter outlined, specifically, that the use of the Honeycrust intellectual property framework, flavor profiles, supplier relationships developed under my research, and the name variant constituted actionable misappropriation, and that we were prepared to file within 72 hours unless a settlement agreement was reached that included full return of the $6,000 plus documented damages. My mother-in-law said, loudly enough that several people nearby turned. "She's trying to ruin everything I built." I said, calmly, "Because I had practiced this. You built it with my recipes, my money, and my name. I'd like those back." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I had used up all my tears 3 weeks earlier in a parking lot on Clement Street, and I was done with them for now. The opening did not go the way they had planned. Their attorney pulled my mother-in-law and my husband aside. The ribbon cutting was delayed. The flower wall stood there looking cheerful and irrelevant. The settlement took 11 days to finalize. I got the $6,000 back. I got documented acknowledgement that the core concept, name framework, and core menu items originated from my materials. They were allowed to continue operating under Honeycroft, but had to reformulate the menu to exclude 8 specific recipes that were clearly mine and pay me a licensing fee for any remaining items derived from my documented work. It was not everything. Priscilla said it rarely is, but it was enough. Here is what I want to tell you about Dara. While all of that was happening, the letters, the meetings, the 11 days of waiting, Dara had been doing something else. She had been talking to a woman who ran a farmers market cooperative on the east side of the city. She had been telling people about me. She had been showing people photographs of my baking on her phone, from years of events and dinners and tests, time-stamped proof of what I could do. The day after the settlement finalized, Dara called me and said, "I need you to come somewhere with me Saturday." I went. It was a commercial kitchen space in a converted warehouse, clean, good equipment, shared use, affordable monthly rental. There was a woman waiting for us named Gloria who ran the cooperative. Dara had apparently spent 3 separate afternoons with her over the previous 2 weeks. Gloria had a booth spot available at the Saturday market, permanent, covered, starting the following month. I stood in the middle of that kitchen and didn't say anything for a moment. Dara said, "I know it's not the same as having your own place yet, but it's the start of the start." I said, "How did you afford?" She said, "I didn't spend money. I spent time. That's what I had." She had spent her weeks of underemployment, the gap between catering jobs, the slow Tuesday mornings going to that market, talking to Gloria, making calls, pulling in a favor from a food photographer she knew who agreed to shoot a portfolio of my work for almost nothing. She had done all of it on $400 and a willingness to show up. I stood there in that kitchen and thought about my grandmother again, about that empty chair at the holiday table, about the jar under the bathroom sink. I thought about how I had spent years filling chairs at someone else's table and leaving mine empty. I asked Dara what she needed. She said she was fine. I said that was not what I asked. She laughed. She said, "A business partner would be nice. If you're offering," I said, "I'm offering." The first Saturday at the farmer's market, we sold out by 10:45. I had made rosemary shortbread my recipe, my concept, undeniable, and lemon lavender bars and a brown butter tart that Dara had suggested I try 2 months earlier when she came over, and we had spent a Sunday afternoon just baking without any plan. The line wrapped around the adjacent booth. A woman bought 4 boxes and came back for 2 more. A man took a card and said his wife ran a corporate catering account. I stood behind that table in the November cold and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happy exactly. Settled. Like something had clicked back into the right position after being slightly off for years. My husband and I are no longer together. That conversation happened quietly, without the drama you might expect, about 3 weeks after the settlement. He said he felt like I had chosen victory over the marriage. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "You chose your mother's investment over my savings without telling me. I think we made our choices at different times." He didn't have an answer for that. We divided things cleanly. I took the notebooks, the baking equipment, the jar empty now, but I kept the jar and the cream blazer. I do not hate him. I think he is someone who never had to figure out who he was because there was always someone nearby willing to tell him. That's not my problem to solve anymore. My mother-in-law sent me a message 4 months later. It said, "The shortbread is not the same without your recipe. I hope you know I thought of you as a daughter." I read it once. I did not reply. I did not wish her ill. I simply did not reply. Dara and I signed a formal partnership agreement on a Tuesday afternoon in March, in Gloria's office at the cooperative, with 2 witnesses and notarized signatures. Dara's mother came. My grandmother was not alive to be there, but I had brought the 3rd notebook, the one with Honeycrust written in the top right corner of every page, and I set it on the table while we signed. The business is called Honeycrust. My name, my concept, my start, our work. We have the farmer's market booth and now 2 wholesale accounts, a coffee shop on the north side and a specialty grocery that takes our shortbread and tarts on consignment. We are 3 months from having enough in the business account to look seriously at a small brick-and-mortar space. I have a new jar. I trust banks now, a little more than before. But I keep the jar anyway because some habits are not about distrust. They are about remembering what it felt like to build something from the bottom. People ask me sometimes what I would have done differently. I say, I would have kept the notebooks locked. I would have gotten everything in writing before transferring $1. I would have listened to my grandmother sooner. She used to say, "Watch what people do when you have something they want." I watched. I just watched a little late, but here is what I know now that I did not know at 26. The thing that was taken from me, the concept, the name, the savings, none of it was the real thing. The real thing was in the notebooks. The real thing was the 4 years of recipe tests and flavor combinations and the Saturday mornings when I would get up before anyone else and just bake because it made me feel like myself. Nobody could take that. They could copy the name, they could use my rosemary shortbread, they could paint their walls antique white 9108, but they could not take the thing that made those choices right in the first place. That's mine. It was always mine. Dara is in the kitchen right now. I can hear her from here. Testing a new filling for a spring menu. She thinks we should try honey and cardamom. And I think she is right. In 20 minutes I'm going to go in there and we are going to argue pleasantly about crust thickness and then make something that doesn't exist yet. I cannot wait.